The Father Christmas Letters by J.R.R. Tolkien. Read by Sam Dobler. 1925. I am dreadfully busy this year. It makes my hand more shaky than ever when I think of it, and not very rich. In fact, awful things have been happening, and some of the presents have got spoilt, and I haven't got the North Polar Bear to help me. And I have had to move house just before Christmas, so you can imagine what a state everything is in. And you will see why I have a new address. It all happened like this. One very windy day, last November, my hood blew off and went and stuck on the top of the North Pole. I told him not to, but the North Polar Bear climbed up to the thin top to get it down, and he did. The pole broke in the middle and fell on the roof of my house, and the North Polar Bear fell through the hole it made into the dining room with my hood over its nose. And the snow fell off the roof into the house, and melted, and put out all the fires, and ran down into the cellars where I was collecting this year's presents, and the North Polar Bear's leg got broken. He is well again now, but I was so cross with him that he says he won't be able to try and help me again. I expect his temper is hurt, and will be mended by next Christmas. I send you a picture of the accident, and of my new house on the cliffs above the North Pole, with beautiful cellars in the cliffs. If John can't read my shaking writing, 1,925 years old, he must get his father to. When is Michael going to learn to read and write his letters to me? Lots of love to both you and Christopher, whose name is rather like mine. Father Christmas. 1926. I am more shaky than usual this year. The North Polar Bear's fault. It was the biggest bang in the world and the most monstrous firework there has ever been. It turned the North Pole black, and shook all the stars out of place, broke the moon into four, and the man in it fell into my back garden. He ate quite a lot of my Christmas chocolates before he said he felt better, and climbed back to mend it and get the stars tidy. Then I found out the reindeer had broken loose. They were running all over the country, breaking reins and ropes and tossing presents up into the air. They were all packed up to start, you see. Yes, it only happened this morning. It was a sleigh load of chocolate things, which I always send to England early. I hope yours are not badly damaged. But isn't the North Polar Bear silly? And he isn't a bit sorry. Of course he did it. You remember I had to move last year because of him. The tap turning on the Aurora Borealis fireworks is still in the cellar of my old house. The North Polar Bear knew he must never, never touch it. I only let it off on special days like Christmas. He said he thought it was cut off since we moved. Anyway, he was nosing around the ruins this morning soon after breakfast — he hides things to eat there — and turned on the Northern Lights for 2 years in one go. You have never heard or seen anything like it. I have tried to draw a picture of it, but I am too shaky to do it properly. And you can't paint fizzing lights, can you? Father Christmas. 1927. It has been so bitter at the North Pole lately that the North Polar Bear has spent most of the time asleep, and has been less use than usual this Christmas. The North Pole became colder than any cold thing has ever been, and when the North Polar Bear put his nose against it, it took the skin off. That is why it is bandaged with red flannel in the picture, but the bandage had slipped. Why did he? I don't know, but he is always putting his nose where it oughtn't to be, into my cupboards, for instance. Also, it has been very dark here since winter began. We haven't seen the sun, of course, for 3 months, and there are no Northern Lights this year. You remember the awful accident last year. There will be none again until the end of 1928. The North Polar Bear has got his cousin and distant friend, the Great Bear, to shine extra bright for us, and this week I have hired a comet to do my packing by. But it doesn't work as well, you can see by that in my picture. The North Polar Bear has not yet really been any more sensible this year. Yesterday he was snowballing the snowman in the garden and pushed him over the edge of the cliff, so that he fell into my sleigh at the bottom and broke lots of things. One of them was himself. I used some of what was left to paint my white picture. Father Christmas. 1928. What do you think the poor dear old bear has been and done this time? Nothing as bad as letting off all the lights. Only fell from top to bottom of the main stairs on Thursday. We were beginning to get the first lot of parcels down out of the storerooms into the hall. Polar Bear would insist on taking on enormous pile on his head as well as lots in his arms. Bang! Rumble! Clatter! Crash! Awful moanings and growlings. I ran out into the landing and saw he had fallen from top to bottom onto his nose, leaving a trail of ball bundles, parcels, and all things all the way down. And he had fallen on top of some of them and smashed them. I hope you got none of these by accident. I have drawn you a picture of it all. Polar Bear was rather grumpy at my drawing. He says my Christmas pictures always make fun of him, and that one year he will send one drawn by himself of me being idiotic. But of course I never am, and he can't draw well enough. When he had picked himself up, he ran out of the doors and wouldn't help clear up, because I sat up on the stairs and laughed as soon as I found there was not much damage done. But anyway, I thought you would like a picture of the inside of my new big house for a change. This is the chief hall under the largest dome where we pile the presents usually, ready to load on the sleighs at the doors. Polar Bear and I built it all nearly ourselves, and laid out the blue and mauve tiles. The banister and roof are not quite straight, but it doesn't really matter. I painted the pictures on the walls of the trees and stars and suns and moons. Father Christmas. 1929. It is a light Christmas again, I'm glad to say. The northern lights have been specially good. We had a bonfire this year, to please the polar bear, to celebrate the coming in of winter. The snow elves let off all the rockets together, which surprised us both. I have tried to draw you a picture of it, but there was really hundreds of rockets. You can't see all the elves at all against the snow background. The bonfire made a hole in the ice and woke up the Great Seal, who happened to be underneath. The polar bear let off 20,000 silver sparklers afterwards, used up all my stock, so that's why I have none to send to you. Then he went for a holiday to North Norway, and stayed with a woodcutter called Olaf, and came back with his paw all bandaged just at the beginning of our busy times. There seem more children than ever in all the countries I specially look after. It is a good thing clocks don't tell the same time all over the world, or I should never get round. Although when my magic is strongest, at Christmas, I can do about 1,000 stockings a minute, if I have planned it all out beforehand. You can hardly guess the enormous piles of lists I make out. I seldom get them mixed, but I am rather worried this year. You can guess from my pictures what happened. The first one shows you my office and packing room, and the polar bear reading out names while I copy them down. We had awful gales here, worse than you did, tearing clouds of snow to a million tatters, screaming like demons, burying my house almost up to the roofs. Just at the worst, the polar bear said it was stuffy, and opened a north window before I could stop him. Look at the result. Only actually, the polar bear was buried in papers and lists, but that did not stop him laughing. Father Christmas. 1930. I have enjoyed all your letters. I hope you will like your stockings this year. I have tried to find what you ask for, but the stores have been in rather a muddle. You see, the polar bear has been ill. He had whooping cough first of all. I could not let him help with the packing and sorting, which begins in November, because it would be simply awful if any of my children caught polar whooping cough and barked like bears on Boxing Day. So I had to do everything myself in the preparations. Of course, Polar Bear has done his best. He cleaned up and mended my sleigh and looked after the reindeer while I was busy. That is how the really bad accident happened. Early this month, we had a most awful snowstorm, nearly 6 feet of snow, followed by an awful fog. The poor polar bear went out to the reindeer stables and got lost and nearly buried. I did not miss him or go look for him for a really long while. His chest had not got well from the whooping cough, so this made him frightfully ill, and he was in bed until 3 days ago. Everything has gone wrong, and there has been no one to look after my messengers properly. Aren't you glad the polar bear is better? We had a party of snowboys, sons of the snowmen, which are the only sort of people that live near. Not, of course, men made of snow, though my gardener, who is the oldest of all the snowmen, sometimes draws a picture of a made snowman instead of writing his name. And polar cubs, the polar bear's nephews, on Saturday as soon as he felt well enough. He didn't eat much tea, but when the big cracker went off after, he threw away his rug and leapt in the air, and has been well ever since. The top picture shows Polar Bear telling a story after all the things had been cleared away. The little pictures show me finding Polar Bear in the snow, and Polar Bear sitting with his feet in hot mustard and water to stop him shivering. It didn't, and he sneezed so terribly he blew out 5 candles. Still, he is all right now. I know because he has been at his tricks again, quarreling with the snowman, my gardener, and pushing him through the roof of his snow house, and packing lumps of ice instead of presents in naughty children's parcels. That might be a good idea, only if he never told me, and some of them, with ice, were put in warm storerooms and melted all over good children's presents. Well, my dears, there is a lot more I should like to say about my green brother and my father, old Grandfather Yule, and why we are both called Nicholas after the saint, whose day is December 6th. Who used to give secret presents, sometimes throwing purses of money through the window. But I must hurry away. I am already late, and I'm afraid you may not get this in time. Father Christmas. 1931. Here is my latest portrait. Father Christmas packing, 1931. If you find that not many of the things you asked for have come, and not perhaps quite so many as sometimes, remember that this Christmas all over the world there are a terrible number of poor and starving people. I, and also my green brother, have had to do some collecting of food and clothes, and toys too, for the children whose fathers and mothers cannot give them anything, sometimes not even dinner. It has gone on being warm up here, not what you would call warm, but warm for the North Pole, with very little snow. The North Polar Bear has been lazy and sleepy as a result, and very slow over packing, or any job except eating. He has enjoyed sampling and tasting the food parcels this year to see if they were fresh and good, he said. But that is not the worst. I should hardly feel it was Christmas if he didn't do something ridiculous. You will never guess what he did this time. I sent him down into one of my cellars, the cracker hole, we call it, where I keep thousands of boxes of crackers. You would like to see them, rows upon rows, with all their lids off to show the kind of colors. Well, I wanted 20 boxes, and was busy sorting soldiers and farm things, so I sent him. And he was so lazy, he took snowboys, who aren't allowed down there, to help him. They started pulling crackers out of boxes, and he tried to box them, the boys' ears, I mean, and they dodged, and he fell over, and his candle fell through, poof, into my firework crackers and boxes of sparklers. I could hear the noise and smell in the hall, and when I rushed down I saw nothing but smoke and fizzing stars, and old Polar Bear was rolling over on the floor with sparks sizzling on his coat. He has quite a bare patch burnt on his back. The snowboys roared with laughter and then ran away. They said it was a splendid sight, but they won't come to my party on St. Stephen's Day. They have had more than their share already. This is all drawn by the North Polar Bear. You don't think he is getting better? But the green ink is mine, and he didn't ask for it. 2 of the Polar Bear's nephews have been staying here for some time, Paxu and Vulkutuka, Fat and white hair, they say it means. They are fat-tummied polar cubs and are very funny, boxing one another and rolling about. But another time I shall have them on Boxing Day and not just at packing time. I fell over them 14 times last week, and Volkutaka swallowed a ball of red string, thinking it was cake, and he got all wound up inside and had a tangled cough. He couldn't sleep at night, but I thought it served him right for putting holly in my bed. It was the same cub that poured all the black ink yesterday into the fire to make night. It did, and a very smelly, smoky one. We lost Paxu all last Wednesday and found him on Thursday morning asleep in a cupboard in the kitchen. He had eaten 2 whole puddings raw. They seem to be growing up just like their uncle. Goodbye now. I shall soon be off on my travels once more. You need not believe any pictures you see of me in aeroplanes or motors. I cannot drive one, and I don't want to. They are too slow anyways, not to mention smell. They cannot compare with my own reindeer, which I train myself. They are all very well this year, and I expect my post to be in very good time. I have got some new young ones this Christmas from Lapland. Father Christmas. 1932. There have been lots of adventures you will want to hear about. It all began with the funny noises underground, which started in the summer and got worse and worse. I was afraid an earthquake might happen. The North Polar Bear says he suspected what was wrong from the beginning. I only wish he had said something to me. And anyway, it can't quite be true. As he was fast asleep when it began and did not wake until Michael's birthday. However, he went off for a walk one day, at the end of November, I think, and never came back. About a fortnight ago, I began to be really worried, for after all, the dear old thing is really a lot of help, in spite of accidents, and very amusing. One Friday evening, December 9th, there was a bumping at the front door and a snuffling. I thought he had come back and lost his key, as often before, but when I opened the door, there was rather another very old bear there, a fat and funny-shaped one. Actually, it was the eldest of the few remaining cave bears. I had not seen him for centuries. "Do you want your North Polar Bear?" he said. "If you do, you had better come and get him." It turned out he was lost in the caves belonging to Cave Bear, or so he says, not far from the ruins of my old house. He says he found a hole in the side of a hill and went inside because it was snowing. He slipped down a long slope and lots of rocks fell after him, and he found he could not climb up or get out again. But almost at once he smelt goblin, and became interested and started to explore. Not very wise, for of course goblins can't hurt him, but their caves are very dangerous. Naturally, he soon got quite lost, and the goblins shut off all their lights, and made queer noises and false echoes. Goblins are to us very much what rats are to you, only worse, because they are very clever, and only better because they are, in these parts, very few. We thought there were none left. Long ago we had great trouble with them. That was about 1453, I believe. But we got the help of the gnomes, who are their greatest enemies, and cleared them out. Anyway, there was poor old Polar Bear, lost in the dark among them, and alone until he met Cave Bear, who lives there. Cave Bear can see pretty well in the dark, and he offered to take poor Polar Bear to his private back door. So they set off together, but the goblins were very excited and angry. Polar Bear had boxed 1 or 2 of them flat that came and poked him in the dark and said some very nasty things to them all. And they enticed him away by imitating Cave Bear's voice, which of course they know very well. So Polar Bear got into a frightfully dark part, all full of different passages, and he lost Cave Bear and Cave Bear lost him. "Light is what we need," said Cave Bear to me. So I got some of my special sparkling torches, which I sometimes use in my deepest cellars, and we set off that night. The caves are wonderful. I knew they were there, but not how many or how big they were. Of course, the goblins went off to the deepest holes and corners, and we soon found Polar Bear. He was getting quite long and thin with hunger, as he had been in the caves for about a fortnight. He said I should soon have been able to squeeze through a goblin crack. Polar Bear himself was astonished when I brought light, for the most remarkable thing is that the walls of these caves are covered with pictures cut into the rock, or painted in red and brown and black. Some of them are very good, mostly of animals, and some are queer, and some bad, and there are many strange marks, signs, and scribbles, some of which have a nasty look, and I am sure have something to do with black magic. Cave Bear says that these caves belong to him, and have belonged to him and his family since the days of his great multiplied by 10 grandfather. And the bears first had the idea of decorating the walls, and he used to scratch the pictures on them in soft parts. It was useful for sharpening claws. Then men came along. Imagine it. Cave Bear says there were lots about at that time, long ago, when the North Pole was somewhere else. That was long before my time, and I have never heard old Grandfather Yule mention it even, so I don't know if he's talking nonsense or not. Many of the pictures were done by these cavemen, the best ones, especially the big ones, almost life-size, of animals, some of which have since disappeared. There are dragons and quite a lot of mammoths. Men also put some of the black marks and pictures there, but the goblins have scribbled all over the place. They can't draw well, and anyway, they like nasty, queer shapes best. I have copied a whole page from the wall of the chief central cave. It is not perhaps quite as well drawn as the originals, which are very much larger, except the goblin parts, which are easy. At the bottom of the page you will see a whole row of goblin pictures. They must be very old, because the goblin fighters are sitting on drassils, a very queer sort of dwarf dachshund horse creature they used to use, but they have died out long ago. I believe the red gnomes finished them off somewhere about Edward IV's time. You will see more on the pillar in my picture of the caves. Doesn't the hairy rhinoceros look wicked? There is also a nasty look in the mammoth's eyes. You will also see an ox, a stag, a boar, a cave bear, portrait of our cave bear's 71st ancestor, he says, and some of the other kind of polarish, yet not quite polar bear. North Polar Bear would like to believe it is a portrait of one of his ancestors. Just under the bears you can see what is the best a goblin can do at drawing a reindeer. But when I rescued Polar Bear, we hadn't finished the adventures. At the beginning of last week, we went into the cellars to get up the stuff for England. I said to Polar Bear, someone has been disarranging things here. Patsu and Volutuka, I expect, he said, but it wasn't. Then, last Saturday, we went down and found nearly everything had disappeared out of the main cellar. Imagine my state of mind. Nothing hardly to send to anybody, and too little time to make new stuff. Polar Bear said, I smell goblin strong. Eventually we found a large hole, but not big enough for us, leading to a tunnel, behind some packing cases in the west cellar. As you will expect, we rushed off to find Cave Bear, and we went back into the caves. We soon understood the queer noises. It was plain the goblins long ago had burrowed a tunnel from the caves to my old home, which was not so far from the end of their hills, and had stolen a good many things. We found some things more than 100 years old, even a few parcels addressed to your great-grand-people. But they had been very clever and not too greedy, and I had not found out. Ever since I moved, they must have been busy burrowing all the way to my cliff, boring, banging, and blasting as quietly as they could. At last they reached my new cellars, and at the sight of all the toys together was too much for them. They took all they could. I dare say they were still angry with the Polar Bear. They also thought we couldn't get at them. But I sent my patent green luminous smoke down the tunnel, and Polar Bear blew and blew it with our enormous kitchen bellows. They simply shrieked and rushed out the other cave end. But there were red gnomes there. I had specially sent for them. A few of the real old families are still in Norway. They captured hundreds of goblins and chased many more into the snow, which they hate. We made them show us where they had hidden things or bring them all back again, and by Monday we had practically everything back. The gnomes are still dealing with the goblins and promise there won't be one left by a new year, but I am not so sure. They will crop again in a century or so, I expect. Father Christmas. 1933. Another Christmas. And I almost thought at one time in November that there would not be one this year. There would be the 25th of December, of course, but nothing from your great, etc. grandfather at the North Pole. My pictures tell you part of the story. Goblins. The worst attack we have had for centuries. They have been fearfully wild and angry ever since we took all of their stolen toys off them last year and doused them with green smoke. You remember the red gnomes promised to clear all of them out. There was not one to be found in any hole or cave by New Year's Day. But I said they would crop up again in a century or so. They have not waited long. They must have gathered their nasty friends from mountains all over the world and been busy all summer while we were at our sleepiest. This time we had very little warning. Soon after All Saints' Day, Polar Bear got very restless. He now says he smelt nasty smells, but as usual he did not say anything, for he does not want to trouble me. He really is a nice old thing, and this time he absolutely saved Christmas. He took to sleeping in the cellar with his nose towards the cellar door, opening on the main stairway down my big stores. One night, just about Christopher's birthday, I woke up suddenly. There was squeaking and spluttering in the room and a nasty smell. In my own best green and purple room that I had just now done up most beautifully. I caught sight of a very wicked face in that window. Then I really was upset, for my window is high up upon the cliff, and that meant there were bat-riding goblins about, which we haven't seen since the Goblin War in 1453 that I told you about. I was only just quite awake when a terrific din began far downstairs in the store cellars. It would take too long to describe, so I have tried to draw a picture of what I saw when I got down after treading on a goblin on the mat. Note: only there was more like 1,000 goblins than 15. Signed, P.B. But you could hardly expect me to draw 1,000. Polar Bear was squeezing, squashing, trampling, boxing, and kicking goblins sky high and roaring like a zoo, and the goblins were yelling like engine whistles. He was splendid. Note: say no more, I enjoyed it immensely. Well, it is a long story. The trouble lasted for over a fortnight, and it began to look as though I should never be able to get on my sleigh this year. The goblins had set part of the stores on fire and captured several gnomes who sleep down there on guard before Polar Bear and some more gnomes came in, and killed 100 before I arrived. Even when we had put out the fire and cleared the cellars and the house, I can't think of what they were doing in my room unless they were trying to set fire to my bed, the trouble went on. The ground was black with goblins under the moon when we looked out, and they had broken up my stables, gone off with reindeer. I summoned help. There were several battles. Every night they used to attack and set fire to the stores before we got the upper hand, and I'm afraid quite a lot of my dear elves got hurt. Fortunately, we have not lost much except my best string, gold and silver, and packing papers and holly boxes. I am very short of these, and I have been very short of messengers. Lots of my people are still away. I hope they will come back safe, chasing the goblins out of my land, those that are left alive. We have rescued all my reindeer. We are quite happy and settled now again, and feel much safer. It will really be centuries before we get another goblin trouble. Thanks to Polar Bear and the gnomes, there can't be very many left at all. Note: and, Father Christmas, I wish I could draw, or had time to try. You have no idea what the old man can do. Lightning and fireworks and thunder of guns. Polar Bear certainly has been busy, helping double help, but he has mixed up some of the girls' presents with the boys in his hurry. We have gotten all this sorted out, but if you hear of anyone getting a doll when they wanted an engine, you know why. Actually, Polar Bear tells me I am wrong. We did lose a lot of railway stuff. Goblins always go for that, and what we got back was damaged and will have to be repainted. It will be a busy summer next year. Father Christmas. 1934. Very little news. After the frightful business of last year, there has not been even a smell of goblins for 200 miles round. But as I said it would, it took us far into the summer to repair all the damage, and we lost lots of sleep and rest. When November came round, we did not feel like getting to work, and were rather slow and have been rushed at the end. Also, it has been unusually warm for the North Pole, and Polar Bear keeps on yawning. Paxu and Volkutaka have been here a long while. They have grown a good deal, but still get up to frightful mischief in between times of trying to help. This year they stole my paints and painted scrolls on the white walls of the cellars, ate the mincemeat out of all the pies made ready for Christmas. Only yesterday went and unpacked half the parcels to find railway things to play with. They don't get on with the cave cubs somehow. Several of these have arrived today and are staying here a few nights with old Cave Bear, who is their uncle, granduncle, grandfather, great-grand-uncle, etc. Paxu is always kicking them because they squeak and grunt so funnily. Polar Bear has to box him often, and a box from Polar Bear is no joke. As there are no goblins about, and there is no wind, and so much less snow than usual, we are going to have a great Boxing Day party ourselves, out of doors. I shall ask 100 elves and red gnomes, lots of polar cubs, cave cubs, and snow babies, and of course Paxu and Volkutaka, and Polar Bear, and Cave Bear and his nephews, etc., will be there. We have brought a tree all the way from Norway, and planted it in a pool of ice. My picture gives you no idea of its size, or of the loveliness of its magic lights and different colors. We tried them yesterday evening to see if they were all right. See picture. If you see a bright glow in the north, you will know what it is. The tree-ish things are snow plants, and piled masses of snow made into ornamental shapes. They are purple and black because of darkness and shadow. The colored things in front are a special edging to the ice pool, and it is made of real colored icing. Paxu and Volkutaka are already nibbling at it, though they should not, till the party. Father Christmas. 1935. No ink this year and no water, so no painted pictures. Also very cold hands, so very wobbly writing. This year it is frightfully cold. Snow, 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 and ice. We have been simply buried. Messengers have gotten lost, and found themselves in Nova Scotia, if you know where that is, instead of in Scotland, and Polar Bear could not get home. This is a picture of my house about a week ago before we got the reindeer sheds dug out. You can see the tunnel we had to make to the front door. There are only 3 windows upstairs shining through the holes, but you can see steam where the snow is melting off the dome and roof. Even Polar Bear had to wear a sheepskin coat and red gloves for his paws. I have had to have a lot of red elves to help me. They are very nice and great fun, but although they are very quick, they don't get on fast, for they turn everything into a game, even digging snow. Polar Bear says that we have not seen the last of the goblins in spite of the battles of 1933. They won't dare to come into my land yet, but for some reason they are breeding again and multiplying all over the world. Quite a nasty outbreak. But there are not so many in England, he says. I expect I shall have trouble with them soon. I have given my elves some new magic sparkler spears that will scare them out of their wits. Father Christmas. 1936. I am sorry I cannot send you a long letter to thank you for yours, but I am sending you a picture which will explain a good deal. I do hope you will like what I am bringing, and will forgive any mistakes, and I hope nothing will still be wet. I am still so shaky and upset, I am getting one of my elves to write a bit more about things. I am Ilbereth. A lot of us red and green elves have gone to live permanently at Cliff House and be trained in the packing business. It was Polar Bear's idea. He said, I am going to have a record year and help Father Christmas to get so forward we can have some time for ourselves on Christmas Day. We all worked hard, and you will be surprised to hear that every single parcel was packed and numbered by Saturday last, 19th of December. Then Polar Bear said, I am tired out. I am going to have a hot bath and go to bed early. Well, you see what happened. Father Christmas was taking a last look around in the English delivery room about 10 o'clock when water poured in through the ceiling and swamped everything. It was soon 6 inches deep on the floor. Polar Bear had simply gotten to the bath with both taps running and gone fast asleep with one hind paw in the overflow. He had been asleep 2 hours when we woke him. Father Christmas was really angry. But Polar Bear only said, I did have a jolly dream. I dreamt I was diving off a melting iceberg and chasing seals. That made Father Christmas angrier, and Polar Bear said, well, draw a picture of it and ask those children if it is funny or not. So Father Christmas has, and he has began to think it very funny, although very annoying himself. Now we have cleared up the mess and got the English presents repacked again, just in time. 1937. I am afraid I have not had any time to draw you a picture this year. You will see I strained my hand moving heavy boxes in the cellar in November, and could not start my letters until later than usual, and my hand gets tired quickly. But Ilbereth, who is now my secretary, has done you what he calls a picture diary. I hope it will do. Dear children, what shall I tell you about my pictures? Polar Bear and Valkutaka and Paxu are always lazy after Christmas, or rather the St. Stephen Day's party. Father Christmas is ringing for breakfast in vain. Another day when Polar Bear, as usual, was late, Paxu threw a bath sponge full of icy water on his face. Polar Bear chased him all round the house and round the garden, and then forgave him, because he had not caught Paxu and found a huge appetite. We had terrible weather at the end of winter, and actually had rain. We could not go out for days. I have drawn Polar Bear and his nephews when they did a venture out. Paxu and Valkutaka have never gone away. They like it so much that they have begged to stay. It was much too warm at the North Pole this year. A large lake formed at the bottom of the cliff and left North Pole standing on an island. I have drawn a view looking south, so the cliff is on the other side. It was about midsummer. The Polar Bear took to trying to paddle a boat or canoe, but fell in so often that the seals thought he liked it, and used to get under the boat to tip it up. That made him annoyed. The sport did not last long, as the winter froze again in early August. Then we began to think of this Christmas. In my picture, Father Christmas is dividing up the lists and giving me my special lot. You are in it. North Polar Bear, of course, always pretends to be managing everything. That is why he is pointing. But I am really listening to Father Christmas, and I am saluting him, not North Polar Bear. We had a glorious bonfire and fireworks to celebrate the coming of winter, and beginning the real preparations. The snow came down very thick in November, and the elves and snowboys had several tobogganing half-holidays. The polar cubs were not good at it. They fell off, and most of them took to rolling or sliding down just themselves. Today, but this is the best bit, I had just finished my picture, or I might have drawn it differently. Polar Bear has been allowed to decorate the big tree in the garden all by himself and a ladder. Suddenly we heard terrible growly, squealy noises. We rushed out to find Polar Bear hanging in the tree himself. "You are not a decoration," said Father Christmas,
"Anyways, I am a light," he shouted. He was. We threw a bucket of water over him, which spoilt a lot of the decorations, but saved his fur. The silly old thing had rested the ladder against a branch instead of the trunk of the tree. Then he thought, I will just light the candles to see if they are working, although he was not told to. So he climbed to the tip of the ladder with a taper. Just then, a branch cracked, and the ladder slipped on the snow, and Polar Bear fell into the tree and caught some wire, and his fur caught on the fire. Luckily, he was rather damp, or he might have fizzled. I wonder if roast polar bear is good to eat. The last picture is imaginary and not very good, but I hope it will come true. It will if polar bear behaves. I hope you can read my writing. I try to write like dear old Father Christmas without the trembles, but I cannot do so very well. I can write Elvish better.
Note, what follows is an Elvish script roughly 1 line long.
That is some, but Father Christmas says I write even that too spidery and you would never read it. It says, "A Merry Christmas to you all. Love, Ilbereth."
1938. You all will wonder what's the news, if all has gone well, and if not, who's to blame, and whether Polar Bear has earned a good mark, bad or fair, for his behavior since last winter. Well, first he trod upon a splinter, and went on crutches in November, and then one cold day in December he burnt his nose and singed his paws upon the kitchen grate, because without the help of tongs he tried to roast hot chestnuts. "Wow!" he cried, and used a pound of butter, best, to cure the burns. He would not rest, but on the 23rd he went and climbed upon the roof. He meant to clear the snow away that choked his chimney up. Of course he poked his legs right through the tiles, and the snow in tons fell on his bed below. He has broken saucers, cups, and plates, and eaten lots of chocolates. He's dropped large boxes on my toes, and trodden tin soldiers flat in rows. He overwound engines and broken springs, and mixed up children's different things. He thumbed new books and burst balloons and scribbled lots of smudgy runes on my best paper and wiped his feet on scarves and hankies folded neat, and he has been, on the whole, a very kind and willing soul. He's fetched and carried, counted, packed, and for a week he never slacked. He's climbed the cellar stairs at least 5,000 times, the dear old beast. Paksu sends love, and Volku Tukka. They are still with me. They don't look a year older, but they're still just a bit more wise and have a pinch more wit. The goblins, you'll be glad to hear, have not been seen at all this year, not near the pole. But I am told they're moving south and getting bold, and coming back to many lands, and making with their wicked hands new mines and caves. But do not fear, they'll hide away when I appear. Christmas Day, postscript by Ilbereth.
Now Christmas Day has come round again, and poor Polar Bear has got a bad pain. They say he's swallowed a couple of pounds of nuts without cracking the shells. It sounds a polarish sort of thing to do, but that isn't all between me and you. He's eaten a ton of various goods, and recklessly mixed all his favorite foods. Honey with ham, and turkey with treacle, and pickles with milk. I think that a week'll be need to put the old bear on his feet. And I mustn't forget his particular treat, plum pudding with sausages and Turkish delight, covered with cream and devoured at a bite. And after this dish he stood on his head. It's rather a wonder the poor fellow's not dead.
Here the script changes hands. Absolute rot. I have not got a pain in my pot. I do not eat turkey or meat. I stick to the sweet, which is why, as all know, I am myself so sweet. Euthenius elf. Goodbye. Here once again the script changes hands back to Father Christmas. You know my friends too well to think, although they're rather rude with ink, that there are really quarrels here. We've had a very jolly year, except for Polar's rusty nail. But now this rhymes must catch the mail, a special messenger must go, in spite of thickly falling snow, or else this won't get down to you on Christmas Day. It's 2:30. We've quite a ton of crackers still to pull, and glasses still to fill. Our love to you on this Noel, and till the next one, fare you well. Father Christmas. Last letter. I am so glad you did not forget to write me this year. The number of children who keep up with me seems to be getting smaller. I expect it is because of this horrible war, and that when it is all over, things will improve again, and I shall be as busy as ever. But at present, so terribly many people have lost their homes, or have left them, half the world seems in the wrong place. And even up here, we have been having troubles. I don't mean only with my stores, of course, they are getting low. They were already last year, and I have not been able to fill them up, so that I have now to send what I can, instead of what is asked for. But worse than that has happened. I expect you remember some years ago we had troubles with goblins, and that we thought we had settled it. Well, it broke out again this autumn, worse than it has been for centuries. We have had several battles, and for a while my house was besieged. In November it began to look likely that it would be captured, and all my goods, and that Christmas stockings would remain empty all over the world. Would it have not been a calamity? It has not happened, and that is largely due to the efforts of Polar Bear. But it was not until the beginning of this month that I was able to send out any messengers. I expect the goblins thought that with so much war going on, this was a fine chance to recapture the North. They must have been preparing for some years, and they made a huge new tunnel which had an outlet many miles away. It was early in October that they suddenly came out in thousands. Polar Bear says that there were at least 1,000,000, but that is his favorite big number. Anyway, he was still fast asleep at the time, and I was rather drowsy myself. The weather was rather warm for the time of year, and Christmas seemed far away. There were only 1 or 2 elves about the place, and of course Paxu and Volkutuka also fast asleep. Luckily, goblins cannot help yelling and beating on drums when they mean to fight, so we all woke up in time and got the gates and doors barred and windows shuttered. Polar Bear got on the roof and fired rockets into the goblin hosts as they poured up the long reindeer drive, but that did not stop them for long. We were soon surrounded. I have not the time to tell you the story. I had to blow 3 blasts on the great horn wind beam. It hangs over the fireplace in the hall, and if I have not told you about it before, it is because I have not had to blow it for over 400 years. Its sound carries as far as the north wind blows. All the same, it was 3 whole days before help came, snow boys, polar bears, and hundreds of elves. They came up behind the goblins, and Polar Bear, really awake this time, rushed out with a blazing branch off the fire in each paw. He must have killed dozens of goblins, he says 1,000,000, but there was a big battle down in the plain near the North Pole in November, in which the goblins brought hundreds of new companies out of their tunnels. We were driven back to the cliff, and it was not until Polar Bear and a party of his younger relatives crept out by night and blew up the entrance to the new tunnels with nearly 100 pounds of gunpowder that we got the better of them, for the present. But bang went all the stuff for making fireworks and crackers, the cracking part, for some years. The North Pole cracked and fell over for the 2nd time, and we have not yet had time to mend it. Polar Bear is rather a hero. I hope he does not think so of himself. But of course, he is a very magical animal, really, and goblins can't do much to him when he is awake and angry. I have seen their arrows bouncing off him and breaking. Well, that will give you some idea of events, and you will understand why I have not had time to draw a picture this year. Rather a pity, because there have been such exciting things to draw, and why I have not been able to collect the usual things from you, or even the very few things you have asked for. I suppose after this year you will not be hanging your stockings any more. I shall have to say goodbye, more or less. I mean, I shall not forget you. We always keep the names of our old friends, and their letters. And later on we hope to come back, when they are grown up and have houses of their own and children. Father Christmas.